Good evening or afternoon, depending on your time zone, and welcome to the Early Career Professionals Committee and section on professional practice webinar on building a private practice. So just as a reminder for folks who maybe have participated in our webinar series before, maybe some information for folks who haven't. This is part of the Virtual Connection and Development Series, which was developed by members of the Division 17 Early Career Professionals Committee for the purposes of presenting timely and relevant networking and professional development opportunities for early career professionals.
The section on professional practice seeks to promote the professional practice of counseling psychology as the science and profession of psychology evolve and the social context changes. To bring together counseling psychologists and other affiliates who specialize and/or have an interest in a broad range of professional practice issues in counseling psychology, to maintain a support network and a forum for sharing ideas and common experiences among counseling psychologists and other affiliates who specialize and/or have an interest in a broad range of professional practice issues in counseling psychology, to promote by mentoring and other means the advancement of professional practice in counseling psychology, to encourage, nominate, and support those engaged in professional practice for appointment and elections to positions of leadership, as well as for awards in Division 17 and the APA.
Awesome. So just to kind of give a broad overview of how we are going to be spending our time, as usual, the webinar is scheduled for about 60 minutes. In this webinar specifically, we'll address the experiences of professionals who have a private practice. So that may either be as their sole career or in addition to maybe another position that they hold. The panelists will discuss their experiences building their private practice and key decisions that informed their work, such as marketing their practice, navigating their schedule, and identifying any specialized focus of their practice. So this webinar is, of course, best suited for those who are interested in learning more about building a private practice. As usual, a few logistics, we are recording our webinar, so as maybe different members of the audience think about participating, just keeping that in mind. The webinar will begin with an introduction of our panelists, and then we'll transition to a moderated discussion based on key factors that inform the panelists' experience. This is a unique webinar, different from other webinars that we've done, in that part of what comes up is we'll be kind of navigating some APA guidelines. So there will be lots of things, like we've already mentioned, that we will be able to discuss, which is awesome. There are some things that we won't be able to discuss, like our panelists won't necessarily be able to market their practice. They won't be able to talk about billable rates. And we also recognize that those questions may come up, and so part of what we can talk about is how to get those questions answered offline, because there's plenty of resources through APA to talk about that. And then, of course, the webinar will conclude with time for questions from members of the audience. If you have questions throughout the presentation, please type them into the chat box, and the moderator will ask them during the scheduled time. Okay.
All right, so I have the pleasure of introducing our panelists for this evening. Our first panelist is Dr. Marci Rowland. She received her PhD in counseling psychology at Indiana University, Bloomington. During her doctoral program, she received specialized training in counseling for families with relationship problems and adolescents with behavioral problems. During her predoctoral and postdoctoral training, she gained additional experience in working with survivors of abuse and addiction issues. Dr. Rowland moved to Pennsylvania in 2007 and has been in private practice since 2009, providing services to adults, adolescents, and families. So that is Dr. Rowland. Our next presenter is Dr. Charmaine Fj Jackman. She is a licensed psychologist of Barbadian heritage who describes herself as a mission-driven therapist entrepreneur. She comes from a long line of women entrepreneurs and has developed expertise in school mental health, court-involved youth and families, and entrepreneurship. She currently serves as the Dean of Health and Wellness at Boston Arts Academy. In 2005, Dr. Jackman opened a private practice where she provides therapy, forensic assessments, consultations, and workshops to professional and community audiences on topics such as diversity, equity and inclusion, school mental health, personal branding, workplace stress and discrimination, and emotional wellness. Dr. Jackman recently launched an organization whose mission is focused on changing the feel and face of therapy by connecting individuals to therapists of color, curating emotional wellness resources by woke wellness experts, and empowering therapists of color to launch their own wellness-focused businesses. That is Dr. Jackman. Thank you both for joining us today.
Glad to be here.
Thank you. Same. I was excited to talk. This is a topic I enjoyed speaking about, so I'm very excited.
Awesome. And knowing that you both have a lot of energy, of course, around this topic, I wonder if a place to start is really kind of at the beginning. So if you could both maybe speak to how you decided to build a private practice, and then through that, maybe how you decided to either join a group practice or start your own practice.
Sure, I'll begin. This was a decision for me made a little bit in ways in which life guides career decisions. I was a trailing spouse for my partner moving here to central Pennsylvania. And upon sort of exploration about the mental health resources in our community, it became fairly clear that living in a rural setting, there really aren't a lot of group practice or large-scale community-based mental health options available in our area. And so I used my Division 17 connections actually and made a relationship with another psychologist in our area. And she helped guide me through the process of starting a private practice. It really is that in our area, that's the best and most effective ways to provide services to our clients in need. And then as far as deciding whether to go the individual solo practice route or to join up with a group practice, I think where I was at in my career, being that this was the first decision I was making, it made the most sense for me to sort of start that out based on my own skills and expertise. And that then made the most sense for me to do on my own, obviously with a lot of consultation and support from other professionals in my community. So that's a little bit about my story. I'm anxious to hear a little bit more about what Dr. Jackman has to say.
Thank you. So my journey was interesting. I grew up in Barbados and didn't really have a lot of access to psychologists. One of the first models was Bob Newhart, who ran a private practice and a bed and breakfast with his wife. So that's something I wanted to do from when I was about 15 years old. But the experience of going through grad school, somehow that got diminished. And I remember saying to myself at different points, oh, I could never see myself working with clients in that way or having a private practice. I also, because of my immigration status, I couldn't work privately. I did have to work for an organization. But I did get awoken when I started connecting after I got licensed, and I started to connect with our early career psychology group. And I met early career psychologists who had their practices. And the experience of hearing about their journeys and hearing how they did it really made it more accessible for me. And so pretty soon after that, I remember we did a panel similar to this for our early career group, and it was the most attended session that we've ever had. But it gave a lot of practical information, and that was one of the ways that helped me to decide that I was going to go forward and start a practice. And so I've only had a private practice. I still operate, I work full-time, and I have my practice is part-time. And I've expanded and cut back depending on what's going on in my life. Similar to you, when I had my kids, I kind of cut back, and then I ramped up again after they got to a certain stage.
Great, thank you both. I realized I did not introduce myself at the start of the presentation. I just launched in and started talking about the section on professional practice. My name is Valine Whitaker. I am a psychologist at the Edith Nourse Rogers Memorial VA in Bedford, Massachusetts, and I am the chair for the section on professional practice. Now, if I could share my next question with you all. what are the benefits of having a private practice, and what are the challenges of having a private practice? And if you all could please speak to a little bit more about whether the private practice is your sole career or whether you're doing this in addition to another job.
Sure, I can start off. For me, my practice, as I mentioned, is a part-time practice. So I see clients in therapy once a week, probably about 4 or 5 hours. In the past, I used to work on weekends, but I've cut back on that for a number of reasons. But my practice is diversified in that I also have a forensic practice, and I do consulting and speaking, so it's pretty diversified. But the benefits are, it gives me one, extra income, which is very useful. But also there's a sense of independence and owning my own business. My mother and grandmother were entrepreneurs, so I've had those models. So that sense of independence and starting something from scratch and growing it, and wrestling with it and thinking about how to expand it or not, those are things that I really enjoy, that really speak to things that kind of drive my passions as well. In terms of challenges, I think going through grad school, there's very little content about how to run a private practice, and so. And I would venture to say many psychologists don't go into grad school to learn business either. So I'll speak for myself, but that's a space where I also feel in terms of some of the finance pieces, some of the operational, those are not the things that I like, woohoo, that I wake up in the morning to do. So I think the operation part of running the private practice can be challenging.
I think I could echo a lot of what Dr. Jackman said. However, being in private practice is my sole profession. So it's my full-time job. I see about 30 to 35 clients in therapy per week. Some of the advantages, though, are really being able to triage and take in clients into my practice that I really feel like I am going to be the best fit for. I am able to specialize and hopefully match the services that I have to offer to the clients that are looking for services. Likewise, I think that I can also use the private practice to evolve as my life changes. I think Dr. Jackman said she was able to sort of pull forward and pull back as maybe her family was growing, things of that nature. So really get the flexibility of deciding how full I want my caseload to be, how many hours per week I feel I can devote at any given time, how many vacations I want to take per year. So I really find that that can be of great benefit. Likewise, I can also plan all of my training around my current caseload. So, I can take a look at the clients that I'm working with now and really tailor my continuing education, all of my reading around my caseload, so I can bring the best of what the field has to offer to what I'm doing every day in the office. Definitely the challenges are almost all around business-oriented aspects of the job that was not trained in grad school to really be prepared to do. Also, I sometimes still struggle to see my own time as valuable. So collecting fees, things of that nature really can be a challenge, I think, for anybody working in a helping profession. But certainly for me personally, that can be a challenge. And then, as I said, I can, manage my own work hours, and sometimes that itself is a challenge as well. The service need in my area is particularly great, and I find that I have to be very vigilant about my own self-care needs and boundaries to be sure that I'm honoring those things and not taking on more work that I'm really capable of doing at any one given time, because the need certainly far exceeds my capacity for being able to do the job.
Yeah, I would add on to that, Dr. Rowland, that I found myself at one point kind of chasing the money, just trying to, because that worry that I'm going to have enough income, and that can really stretch the self-care, not having a shut-off time, particularly when you own your own business, you're sometimes you often feel as though you're always on, because it stops with you. It starts and ends with you. So that can be a challenge to shut down and make space for self-care.
I so appreciate what you all have shared so far. It's making me think, like, I'm just so glad we're doing this. I'm like having all these follow-up questions. I'm going to look at Valine and just share. I might go a little bit out of order to just build a little bit on kind of what's been shared in terms of the questions that we have for you all. Given it seems like a theme of what you shared is that the business pieces are the ones where you didn't necessarily have the explicit training during graduate school. So I'm wondering how, like, what resources or supports you all were able to access to figure out how to navigate that piece of it.
I'll start. I think I mentioned when I was talking about making the decision to go into private practice that I was very fortunate to connect with a mentor who actually is also an SCP member, counseling psychologist in my local area. And so I think it was really helpful to have somebody further along in the practice development process to help guide me through those early stages of development. Also, we have a large group of independent practitioners, and so we have a consultation group that meets monthly for breakfast. It's really gotten away from case consultation and more along the lines of, who might have openings on their caseload, what relationships with psychiatrists have been helpful for your patients. Those sorts of questions are things I can take to the group on a monthly basis. So it feels really much more safe for me to know that I have this, group of other practicing professionals with whom, if I can't access them immediately in my day-to-day, I know I have that touchstone out there on our monthly meetings with which to bring some issues as they might arise. So, not surprisingly, as a counseling psychologist, I think relationships have been my greatest guide and my greatest asset to helping me through this process.
Yeah, that's for sure. I think I mentioned the early career psychology group that I was a part of. That was instrumental. And for people to just, be available to answer questions and, provide samples of work that they did, or, samples of their agreements, just some of the very practical day-to-day. I also remember attending how to start a private practice workshop that was offered by the state association. So those were things that helped me get on my way. I think more recently, because for me anyway, I feel like I always have to evolve and learn and keep up, particularly around business aspects. So some of the resources I've connected with, there's a podcast that I really like called Trailblazers Podcast. It's specifically for entrepreneurs of color. So that's been really helpful for me in thinking about myself as a business and just hearing other people's journeys and experiences and little tips. That's really been helpful. So I listen to that routinely. I also have read books around starting a private practice, but also just around other like memoirs or books written by other entrepreneurs. Again, just having information about the journey and their journey, and knowing that, there's going to be ups and downs and how you bounce back or how you see failure as opportunities. So one of the things that I talk about is having that entrepreneur mindset, that psychologist entrepreneur mindset has also really been helpful. Seeing myself as a business and seeing myself as a brand has really been helpful in tailoring my language around how I market to clients, how I market to my colleagues and friends as well. What else do and then also I do, most states have a small business administration office at SBA, and that's a federal program. And so they offer, in addition to workshops, they offer mentoring and coaching. Many of them are not psychologists, but for me it's helpful in, again, developing those business skills that we didn't get in grad school.
Wonderful, thank you both. I agree. I'm getting even more excited hearing more about your perspectives on solo practice. You all both spoke to some themes related to this next question. So I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit more about how you support your ongoing professional development and how you navigate consultation with other clinicians.
I'll start. I think for me personally, it was very important early on to sort of separate those individuals that I could go to for consultation and those individuals that I was using for supervision. So I mentioned the consultation group, and I think it was really important for us to define the mission or the boundaries of what that group was able to provide. And it really is much more along the lines of business and educational kinds of pursuits. And then I have a separate, smaller monthly supervision group where I will go with particular case concerns, clinical issues, things of that nature. So I think it was really helpful for me to kind of divide it up in that way, so that I have resources in both arenas for whom I can go to for advice. And then I think it's really helpful for me too to try to take a look at my caseload and the particular issues that are coming up for my clients as related to continuing education. And we're so fortunate now to be living in an area in which we can have the technological advances to seek out continuing education, that although it may not happen live in my community, again, living rather rural Pennsylvania, we don't get a lot of live CEs that come through that I find are relevant to my clinical population. However, I know the section on professional practice puts forward some webinars. You can find all kinds of things through live webcast that can be really useful in matching to what my clients are bringing into the room.
Yes, for me, similarly, I definitely go to my state association workshops that they present, like some on telehealth and just things that might be emerging, but also topics related to my practice as well. I do get some access through my full-time job to trainings as well. So, I'm always looking for things that can connect and overlap. I also find it helpful, again, to really always continue, in addition to the clinical skills, really kind of growing in the business skills. So, connecting with, participating or attending workshops that are not psychology related, but they're around entrepreneurship or business skills. Dr. Rowland talked earlier about recognizing the value of our services. Sometimes we went to a workshop on how do you do pricing. Well, it's a different thing, but it just helped to kind of that thinking about how do you value yourself. I do a lot of TED Talks as well around, again, that personal growth and building that confidence, and recognizing things that I need and support. This year I started working with an executive coach, and that's been really helpful in also helping me to think and push some of the goals that I have for myself that I've kind of put on the back burner. So.
Yeah, I think that's really important, to just the idea of accountability too, that, as we're thinking through our business goals, wanting to, set those goals out for ourselves, but also make our intentions known to other people so that they might be able to help hold us accountable to reaching those goals.
Yeah.
I really appreciate you both. Marci, or Dr. Rowland, you specifically mentioned the piece around relationships. I can hear how for both of you, whether it's like a consultation group, a supervision group, an executive coach, like relationships, being able to talk and kind of being on this like ongoing growth process is such a key part of the process for you both. It's exciting to hear, so thank you for that. This is, the next question is something that you both kind of alluded to a little bit earlier, so maybe to go back to that, but expand a little bit in terms of like what your practices look like. And so I guess a few questions, and then however they resonate, obviously you can talk it through. So I guess, do you have a specialized focus of your practice? And if so, how did you decide what that would be? And then knowing that with the specialized practice, what that means is there's some clients that you work with, and then maybe some clients that you don't necessarily work with. And so how do you set boundaries if clients that you're not necessarily going to be working with are reaching out to you? Kind of what does that process look like?
Sure, I can start. So my practice, as I mentioned earlier, it's really diversified. So I have a therapy branch, I have forensic assessment branch, and I have speaking and workshops branch. So those are kind of the main pieces. In terms of therapy, it took me a while, but I've gotten to the place, and through some of the branding work that I do and branding workshops I've taken, to really understand myself as a brand. And as part of that process, understanding who my ideal client or audience is. And so when you have a sense of that, then you know who you, and part of that is understanding who you work best with, who you have the most impact or the best results with, what kind of issues or population. So that's been really helpful. I think I mentioned earlier, at first I took anybody who came through the door because it was really about just, it was like all about quantity, right? It was just like, get it in, get the money. But now I'm at a place where I'm really focused on the quality of the work that I'm doing. So in the last year only, I've been in practice for about 15 years, have really said, I do the best work with adolescent girls and women of color around depression, anxiety, trauma, workplace issues, stage of life issues. So that's my ideal kind of population and client issue that I enjoy working with as well, because part of it is also being able to, I think Dr. Rowland tended to mention earlier, it's like, the clients that you see, what is the work that you also truly enjoy? And so that's the group that I find most helpful, most enjoyable, and I have the most impact with. I also do forensic work. When I first started out, I did a range of child custody evaluations, parenting, criminal, and over the time, I've also really cut back. And because the work that I really love within that work is the parenting capacity assessments. So in many ways, I've kind of tailored down. While I started out with this wide funnel, I've really at this point really kind of narrowed my focus. And through that is, again, understanding myself as a brand, create a niche that's based on quality, what brings me joy, but also where I have the most impact.
I felt a similar pressure to, fill the work hours with clients, especially early on in building my practice. Of course, so being full-time and again, seeing the work week as fairly flexible because I get to determine my own work hours. Let me back up. I specialized in working with adolescents in some training during graduate school, and I really feel like that is my passion and where I connect best. But what I also realized pretty early on is that in terms of scheduling, that population is really hard to capture during the 9 to 5. And so I have very long evening hours during the school year to be sure that I'm not pulling adolescents out of school and creating additional stressors for them academically as they try to work through their mental health issues as well. So there's a little bit of logistical issues that I bumped up against pretty quickly, realizing that, one, I don't have the stamina to be in the office every evening and every Saturday to work solely with adolescents, although I do feel like that's where my passion and my effectiveness is probably at its greatest. So, kind of had to find some balance for myself. So currently I would say 50% of my caseload is adolescents and 50% are more general adult population. So they can fill some of those daytime hours, school-based hours. But typically I'm in the office from 8 in the morning until 8 at night. Now, not every one of those hours is filled with a client, but it can be pretty exhausting. So I think there's definitely some, again, self-care issues to take into consideration. And then also I think for me, I see myself possibly aging out of being able to have the kind of connection with adolescents that I do at this stage of my life. I'm not sure that I will always be able to connect with them the same way that I do now. So I want to be responsive to that and be sure that I'm continuing to be as effective as possible with the clients that I'm working with. As far as deciding when somebody might be a better fit with another clinician, certainly gotten better at doing the phone screens and making sure that I know what questions I want to ask about what somebody's looking for out of treatment. So that if I'm not the right fit, I might be able to determine that before they even have an initial visit with me and start to form a relationship. It's much easier to pass somebody along before they've come in the door, and feel really fortunate that in my area, we have, a number of other providers that I feel very confident in passing people along to. And so I can say with a great deal of confidence to these individuals or to these adolescents' parents, if this were my sister, I would really want her to see this individual and give that person's name with great confidence that they will be able to do a good job in meeting that person's needs.
Yes, I agree. The screening is really important part of that. And I think we might talk about it a little bit later, but also communicating in terms of your referral, people who are referring, like who do you see? Who are the clients that you want to take? I was going to add one more point, but I lost track of it. So I'll share again if I remember in a minute.
Yes, I think we can be flexible here. So definitely please kind of leave it back in if you see it showing up in another opportunity and questions. This is a kind of a similar question to some of what you all have been talking about with regards to working with particular populations or shaping your practices in this way. Can you each talk a little bit about how you all have marketed yourself with respect to your practice?
I think that your best marketing resource are your current clients, so word of mouth. And so if you do good work, people are going to want to recommend you to their friends. So I think, again, why it's so important to your previous question about, who's your ideal client, really understanding who that is, because when you know that, then you're going to do the work that shows results. You're going to provide the work that gives results, and people are going to want to come back or refer you to their friends. So that's one piece, I think, just developing a reputation of being solid, excellent, whatever route your practice takes, whether it's therapy or assessments. I have attorneys who are often refer me. I have an attorney, she refuses to give other people my name now because she's worried that I will be too busy to take one of her clients. So I think really building a reputation. And then some of the more traditional routes like websites, networking, right? So we're in the day and age where people hear your name, they're going to go online to check out who you are, whether it's your website or your Instagram or Twitter. So it's easier to get information about you. So people are going to search for that. But I think networking within psychology, but also outside of psychology as well. So within your professional association, but also connecting to other associations. Those are great ways to find clients.
I think the only thing that I would add to that is being a transplant to my geographical area, coming in kind of cold, wanting to introduce myself to the community. I sent out very traditional practice announcements, much like you would say birthing announcement, announcing my arrival to the community, explaining my specialties. And I sent all of these announcements to primary care doctors in our area. We do get a lot of referrals from primary care docs, as well as school guidance counselors. Again, thinking through, the population that I was really wanting to work with and where those kids might first seek services or maybe have a first point of contact, wanting my name to be available to those people to pass that along as well. And then also, again, maybe this is just a rural population issue or maybe it's not, but my name and number is still in the phone book. And sometimes I wonder why I'm spending this monthly fee on having that name in the phone book, but I do think it sort of legitimizes my presence as well, just to continue to have that in print.
Yeah, and the one other point I would add is just visibility in the community. So whether you're, presented workshops for parent teachers associations, or, whatever is your specialty takes, where are those clients going to show up? So at your library, or Boys and Girls Club, or senior homes, senior centers. So wherever your population is, making space to go out and do some free workshops. Sometimes it does take a little grind doing stuff for free, but I've found it really helpful. And sometimes you may not get a hit right away, but I've had people attend my workshop, and 10 years later they call me because they remembered me and had my card. So don't ever underestimate the kind of the impact that you can have, or the feeling that you leave with people. So people are taking note and people are watching. So do your good work, whatever. If you're getting paid $1,000 or nothing, right? You still shred up and do your best work.
I so hear that piece that y'all are talking about in terms of how, in some ways, all of these different pieces are so nuanced based on whether like it's your brand, whether it's your like the area that you're in, whether it's a particular clientele that you work with, which like saying it out loud feels super obvious, but also it's just such a helpful reminder in terms of thinking about how to really kind of create the practice that makes sense for you. I know we have a ton of questions coming in from participants, and I want to make sure that we get to those. So we have one more question for you all, which is, of course, the question around, like, what do you wish you had known when you were kind of beginning this process? I guess kind of overall, like, words of wisdom based on the experiences that you've had.
So I guess I wished I had known that it wasn't as intimidating as I expected that it would be, and that although I don't know anything beyond what it's like to work in my own community, it doesn't have to be a cutthroat industry. Again, we are all still working, and that is important to consider. But I think I had built it up to be very scary in my mind, and was very relieved to find out just how easy it could be. Certainly don't want to minimize the struggles, but just really wished I hadn't psyched myself out before I started.
Yeah, I think that's a really key point. Just starting small. And I mean, I remember starting with one client, using an office on evenings or weekends when the clinician wasn't in the office, kind of capitalizing on that, and which gave me a lower fee. So I think really, one, just if it's something you want to do, or even if you're thinking that you never wanted to do it, just even opening your mind to exploring that. And really, I think the other piece is just developing that psychologist entrepreneur mindset, really honing in on the business skills. And yes, it can seem intimidating, but we can do it. We've had the training, and it's definitely accessible. So it's something you can do, and think about the things that you're passionate about and where else you might want to expand that. So start with your passion and your purpose.
Thank you so much, Drs. Rowland and Jackman, for your words of wisdom. At this point in time, we want to transition into our Q&A. As Ali said, we have quite a few questions coming in that we want to make sure that we attend to. So I'm going to pose the questions to the panelists, and feel free to answer in what order fits you, whoever wants to answer first. So let's go ahead and start with our first question. One of the participants says, I would be really interested in hearing more about how these clinicians market to private pay clients. I want to have a balanced caseload of insurance-based and private pay clients. Thoughts?
So that's a good question. And I don't market to private pay clients per se. I do have some private pay clients in my practice. And I found that the longer that in practice, and again, people particularly coming to me are often usually from referrals from someone who's worked with me. So they see the value in the work that I do and what I bring. So people are willing, the insurance doesn't match. They're willing to do it, but I don't see myself as marketing, particularly for private pay clients. I know I have colleagues in my network who only take private pay, and it's visible on their website. But for me, it's a balance for me about having been given access to people who can not afford it, but also wanted to, and then I go back and forth with that. But some days I'm like, I just want to see private pay. I don't want to deal with having to bill and all those things that come with insurance-based practice. But I keep finding myself not doing that. So, but I found a way to balance it out. So sorry, no, I don't have specific information about or advice around that topic. Your question.
I'm going to echo that as well. I don't necessarily market for private pay, but it does certainly find its way into my practice. Again, sometimes it is just an insurance change where a client starts out and we are an insurance match, and then there's a job change or just an insurance change within their organization, and all of a sudden I'm not a match, but then we work out some sort of private pay arrangement. Whereby they might still seek reimbursement on their own from their insurance company. So there's that kind of way of managing things as well. But I also know that there are ways in which you might obtain private pay clients through things that are not traditionally billed through insurance. Groups, for example, if you're doing sort of a different type of psychoeducational group, you might get people in the door that way. Sort of splitting the fee between multiple people for the service, and then maybe using that as a platform with which to access those individuals for further services.
Yeah, and then add into that. Thank you for that, Dr. Rowland. So add in, because I do forensic assessments, that's something that's not insurance based at all, and I do work some with private pay and some that's paid by the state. So I also balance in that way. But those are ways, think about the niche that you have or the specialty you want to develop. And if you're one of the few people doing it, and it's something that people need, then that's a great way to advertise and showcase what you bring and why you may not want to take insurance for that.
Thank you both. Moving on to our next question. This is a two-part question. So it starts with, how are you able to ebb and flow the number of clients that you have when your availability changes with family, vacation, etc.? Part one. And then part two is, do you predict when you'll be terminating with certain clients and not take on new clients?
I'll speak to that. I think, best case scenario, sort of ideally speaking, I do try to plan ahead for things that I know are coming up on my calendar. Although, life throws curves and that's just not always possible. But for my particular population, I've noticed over the years now that there are ebbs and flows to their transition points. There are some natural termination points in my caseload. When kids go to college, for example, I do have quite a bit of turnover sort of at the end of the summer for either college students who I've just been working with over the summer who are returning to school, or high school graduates who are moving on to the next step in their life, college, occupation, or otherwise. So I can plan a little bit for that. Also, just around the holidays in general, there tends to be a lack of interest in starting something new because there's just so much going on in other people's lives. So it does tend to kind of slow down then, which gives me a little bit more flexibility around making some plans to celebrate the holidays with my family who are out of state. But as far as knowing when people might be coming close to transition, I think sometimes I gauge that really well. Other times I'm really not even close. But I do have a wait list, and I try to keep my wait list under what I imagine to be a 4-month period of time. And so I'm always sort of looking ahead and hoping that I have an opening for somebody that's on that wait list so I can get them in just as quickly as possible. But it really is something that you just sort of get a better feel for with more experience. I'm hoping Dr. Jackman has some additional insights to that as well.
Not really, but I think similar to you, I know like particularly in New England area, the summer is people are going on vacation, so that's the time I want my own downtime. I love summer, so I can build that in as part of my schedule. And you know, the clients I have are pretty flexible with that. So I think, you know, if, like I said, you can never predict unless you're doing, you know, specific short interventions that are time limited or time specific. It can be hard to predict, but you know, having a waiting list, or again, staying connected to your referral sources is going to make sure that you have that steady stream of clients coming in. And also making sure that you are being really diligent about the business side in terms of saving and having money put aside for your practice. So if there is a dip that you aren't, you know, you don't want to be running, you know, month to month in terms of your saving or the money that you're coming into your business. So making sure you're creating a savings plan that helps prepare for times where there may be a downturn in the economy or in your practice.
Yeah, I appreciate that comment as well. I think that's so very valuable. Again, even planning for vacation, you know, unlike a traditional job setting where you might get paid time off, you know, not only are you saving for the vacation itself, but you need to also be thinking about saving for that lost income that you won't be earning for that particular period of time.
Great, great. Last question here, or one of our last questions. I invite you all, if you have additional questions, go ahead and put those in the Q&A box so we can address those. But this next question is, how is it like to establish a private practice that accepts insurance? What are some resources and supports around working with insurance companies?
Can you repeat the question one more time, please?
Sure. How is it like to establish a private practice that accepts insurance? What are some resources and support around working with insurance companies?
In terms of resources in Massachusetts, in my state, we have a pretty active state association that, Director of Professional Affairs, DPA, who they're really active in advocating with the various insurance companies, the major ones in our state. So I find the state association is one of my best resources for getting updates on things that are happening insurance-wise. We have an active listserv that there's at least one question a day around some insurance issue. So that's a great way that I've found information around understanding changes in insurance, or if having trouble with reimbursement or not getting paid. That's a place that people will post questions, and our DPA, the association, they're really responsive. But they're also actively, because of the membership, you know, and which is so important to be members of your state associations, that they're out there advocating around those practice issues.
Most insurance companies themselves also have a provider representative. So if you're thinking about an specific insurance company itself, you might want to locate their provider representative's contact information. That's very direct way of going about getting information about that specific insurance company. And I always try to empower my clients as well to be sure that they're doing some legwork to understand their own particular policy. Not to relieve myself of any of my own responsibilities, but so that they themselves know exactly what their insurance pays, does not pay, if they have a deductible, all of these things oftentimes sound like mumbo jumbo. Even to me, about my own insurance policy as a consumer. So I think it's helpful to encourage people to educate themselves, and also to know when their benefit year rolls over. So if you have a high deductible plan, you've met that deductible as of now, but your insurance policy turns over again in July, you need to be prepared for the fact that that deductible will come due again. And so if you're not completed with treatment, all of a sudden there will be quite a bit of difference between what you might pay for a copay versus a direct service hour.
The next question is, what are some books that you would recommend for opening up a private practice or general entrepreneurship?
I want to defer to Dr. Jackman on this one because I want to hear what's on her reading list.
Charmaine, I think you're muted.
Sorry about that. There's this woman, okay, Lynn Grodsky. She's done a lot of books. I can show the book if that's okay. She's done a lot of writing around starting private practices. So that's one resource there. You put in Amazon private practice, you're gonna get tons of hits on that. There are also a lot of websites as well that are geared towards, they have webinars and blogs and things like that that's helpful in starting your practices. There are a number of them out there. But I can definitely send you guys later if you guys want to share with people afterwards.
I think that would be great. I would love to have that list, and Allie and I will definitely share it with the others. At this point in time, are there any other questions from the attendees? If there are, go ahead and type them in the Q&A box. I'll give you a minute to do so. And, okay. Oh, one question here is, what EHRs do you use?
I use Therapy Notes. There are a lot of great products out there. That's the one I've landed on. And I was just thinking about that question actually when we were talking about resources with which to start a private practice. And certainly one of the things that has made my life tremendously easier is being able to use an electronic medical records system. Not only do I do my notes, but I do all my billing through the same system as well. So it's made my life significantly easier.
Yeah, in my private practice, I don't use one right now, but I'm actually in the process of doing that. I'm on part of the APA's technology review panels, so that's going to be the next. We're looking at different EHR systems, so check that out. But in my work, I actually introduced an electronic health record in the school that I work with, which is pretty unusual, and we use Therapy Notes. But I know I hear a lot of people use Simple Practice as well. So those tend to be the popular ones that I hear people talk about.
Thank you both. Dr. Rowland, it seems like you mentioned that you use Therapy Notes also for your billing service. Do you use anything else for your billing service? And also for you, Dr. Jackman, what do you use for your billing service?
Yep, nope, I do all of my billing services through Therapy Notes, with the exception of a few that I still have to send by paper because I'm out of network. But just secondarily to that, I think having a good accountant is really helpful as well. I know that's not specific to billing, but it is related to taxes associated with the income that's generated that way.
Yes, very good point. Having a tax accountant is very, very, very important. In terms of billing, the insurance that I use, they have a billing system that's built in. So that's been really helpful. So I haven't had the need, because my caseload is, for my therapy practices, about 5 or 6. It doesn't really go over 5 or 6 clients. So I've been able to manage that with my doing through the insurance company's system, and that's pretty good. I do it all online. The money gets direct deposited into my account, so that's been really key. I think part of the systems to set up, if you are going to go kind of on your own, you want to develop systems to help organize that information. So At first I used to do paper and pen and write, each time a client come, I would have a chart, create these charts. Now I've gone to the Google Doc form. So every time a client comes in, I will put that in and that goes to an Excel spreadsheet. And at the end of the month, I'll do the billing. So you also want to think about how often you'll do your billing as well, in terms of that helps, in terms of your revenue, how often you want to make sure that these are running. I know colleagues who use a billing person, so they may use, even though they have the EHR system within their system, built in within their practice, they will also have a biller who will just process those claims for them. There are many people out there who are doing the billing, so there are many options to organizing the billing piece of it. And again, if you are a state association, my guess that they have an active private practice, a practitioner segment, that connecting with that group will help you that's a great way to ask for resources, referrals in the area. But I do want to echo Dr. Rowland's point about the accountant. That's super important when you are in private practice, particularly your estimated taxes. I have a friend who did not pay her estimated taxes for the year and then got a huge bill from the IRS, and you have to pay that or you incur very high interest penalty. So really taking care of having a tax accountant is key to your practice. Yes, yes, yes.
So we have one question. I recognize we have 2 minutes left. So very briefly, do you have any recommendations for starting a private practice as an unlicensed clinician or prior to getting licensed?
I've had that question before. And I say, don't do it for therapy. I think you just run the risk of, you would have to have someone supervise your work. I just think it's better for you to wait and get licensed and be above board. But there are other things that you could do, like doing workshops. So there may be other things that you could, I think doing workshops is really one of the things that you can do. I know sometimes people consult, but I think ethically you want to be clear with people that you're not licensed and who your supervisor is. But I think it gets very tricky, and I just think it's, my opinion is not worth putting your potential license on the line. So.
All right, then. Well, on that note, I will wrap us up. I want to thank Drs. Jackman and Rowland for their participation this evening. Ali Baleen for also organizing alongside with me. I want to thank the participants for their engagement today and their very rich questions. If you have any questions regarding what was discussed this evening, feel free to email myself or Ali with any feedback or questions. You can also email Valine with any specific questions about the section on professional practice. We will be planning our next webinar, and you should receive some information about that on the Division 17 listserv once we get some ideas around that. If you have any feedback or thoughts, let us know. We appreciate your participation, and we hope you all have a wonderful evening. Bye-bye.